I'm Carrie Spaulding, the 30-something coach. My guest today is Sara Eckel, author of It's Not You, 27 Wrong Reasons You're Single. And Sara, you started out writing in the Modern Love column of the New York Times, and now you've put together this incredible book, which is really not a dating guide and not so much a key to finding out what's wrong with you, but maybe what's actually not wrong with you. And it is hilarious and really on point and witty, and I'm so excited that you're here to talk with us today. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. This is really fun.
Great. So, you yourself were single for most of your 30s, and you spent some amount of time trying to kind of answer that question that so many 30-something singles have. What's wrong with me? So I'd love to invite you to read a little excerpt from your book.
Okay. Why was I unable to find the thing that mattered to me most? I was trying so hard, obeying the incessant drumbeat to get out there, dutifully mining my psyche for any emotional blockages that might be preventing me from finding lifelong love. I took hour-long commutes to attend the birthday parties of coworkers' friends and went to the midnight shows of college acquaintances' bands. I spent countless hours and dollars on yoga, gym memberships, and other forms of personal maintenance. And yet, there it was. I was a woman in her late 30s alone. What was wrong? What was wrong with me?
And the world was more than ready to answer that question for any of us who want to put it out there, right? And I'm curious, what are some of the things that, as you went on that quest to find out what was wrong with you, what are some of the answers that, whether it was dating experts or your own soul searching or self-help books, what are some of the things that you found out were wrong with you?
Well, one of the first ones that when I remember speaking to a dating expert, and she talked about, well, first I'll just say that I frequently injected myself into various conversations that I would have with dating experts, which was maybe not the most professional thing for me to do, but it definitely it got the conversation rolling, and it kind of helped me on my little quest to figure this out. So I had one who kind of implied that perhaps the issue was that I was afraid of commitment, because it seemed that I always chose men who were afraid of commitment. But the problem was that those guys often went on to commit to other women. So they really weren't afraid of commitment. They just, for whatever reason, didn't want to commit to me. So then there was this idea of that I was too needy, too desperate for, the fact that I wanted a relationship seemed to be evidence that I wasn't ready for it. But then on the flip side, I would often hear, too independent or too intimidating. So it was really tough to figure out, well, how can I show that I'm open and available to a relationship, but also not seem too weak or needy? I just couldn't figure out where was that perfect balance.
Right. You write in the book about that sort of walking into a date kind of showing, look how confident and put together and independent and fabulous I am, and see how vulnerable I am and ready for a relationship, and sort of trying to hold both of those stories at the same time.
Yeah, it's a really funny thing. And the weird thing is that we do I think most of us actually do hold all those stories at the same time. It's just that we think it's bad. We think it's bad that we want a relationship, and we think it's bad that we're also fine on our own. We somehow always interpret this in the negative, as opposed to realizing, well, yeah, we're all complicated people, and we're just kind of looking for another complicated person that we fit with, as opposed to thinking you have to fit into some particular mold of what a lot of dating experts say is the woman, the marriageable female, the woman, this ideal woman that we're all kind of supposed to aspire to.
So, and at some level, your answer to this question, why are you still single, is because you're still single, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
You are.
Because you are. Because for whatever series of circumstances that have transpired in your life, it had led to your being single. And it's not about being desperate or too independent. one reason many people are single is because they simply have the fortitude to wait for the right relationship, that they aren't afraid to be alone. So even if they don't always like it, they actually have the courage to say, no, this doesn't feel quite right. I'm gonna wait until something that really that actually makes my life better, as opposed to something rushing towards something because you're so afraid to be alone. I think that single people need to give themselves a lot of credit for the fact that they don't that they really are not afraid to be alone, because obviously they're doing it.
And so it's a kind of strength
Yeah.
to listen to your instincts. And you actually talk about that a lot in the book, about we've kind of been taught and conditioned and self-helped out of tuning into our own instincts. And I'm really curious how our viewers can reconnect with those instincts.
Well, the thing that really helped me, and maybe it's not for everybody, but the thing that really helped me, meditation helped a lot. What I like about meditation is that it take about half an hour a day. You don't have to start. I didn't start out with half an hour. I started out with maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day, where you really just focus on being present and not thinking. And not thinking is pretty much impossible. So what you end up doing instead is noticing that you're thinking, and you start to notice these kind of various narratives that go through your head. And when you can actually start to see it, you can start to question it, and you can start to realize how often we're so often very mean to ourselves in a way that we would never be mean to our friends or even people we don't like. Just like, oh, he didn't call because I said that stupid thing, and I'm so stupid. We get these little weird dialogues in our head. And I think sometimes that soundtrack is running through our head so much that we don't even question it. But when you can kind of take that time to just be quiet and notice all of this chatter in your brain, it gives you a moment to kind of stand back and say, wait, is that actually true? And I'm not actually, no, I'm not stupid. I'm not, I'm not ugly, or whatever it is, whatever the thing is, or I'm not any worse than anybody else, which was kind of a helpful concept for me to just see that, well, everybody's kind of imperfect in their way. So why should I feel like I have to meet this high level? So I think,
and a lot of those people are partnered, right? You talk in the book about how, at some point, now you are married, and you said sort of, well, what was wrong with me? Plenty.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not really the point, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like everybody has stuff that's quote unquote wrong with them, but we all, the key is just to find someone who likes you anyway, and who you like anyway, despite all of their stuff. So I think that definitely, like, clearing your head is really helpful. The other thing I think was helpful for me was, I talk a lot about the feedback that single people get from the world and from friends, from family, but so often we get that feedback because we ask for it, or because we complain enough that people feel like they have to, they just want something to say. Mm-hmm. And so I found that not talking about it was really helpful, because then I wasn't getting my brain cluttered with a lot of other people's feedback and other people's stuff, which might actually have more to do with their own experience than mine. So that was the other thing that I found helpful, is just maybe just take a diet from other people's advice.
And I love the part in the book where you talk about kind of responding to those kinds of questions. Why are you still single? When you kind of respond with, I don't know. It sort of puts it back onto that person to kind of manage their own discomfort, rather than making it about something for you to deal with.
Yeah, it kind of says, it sort of puts it on them, and it points out that it's also making a statement of, I don't have to explain this to you, because what else can you say? That's a question that so many single women said really bothers them, is how do they answer that question? And you're so often initially compelled to say, well, it's because I'm really picky, or something like that. You try to spin it, it's a flaw, but you spin it in a good way.
I'm so busy with my career right now, or
busy with a career, as if if you met someone, you would say that, that was really great. You'd say, oh, sorry, I'm busy with my career. You say these things to kind of, or you talk about how much you love your life, which I think also can lead to people they want an answer. So they'll just say, oh, she's too career focused, or, oh, she doesn't really want a relationship. She's so, that's where I think that whole you're too intimidating, you're too independent thing comes from, is that we kind of supply that answer for people just as a way to make people feel comfortable, but then it becomes this thing for them to just kind of check off, like, oh, okay, now I can put her in that category, and now I understand it. So I think it's important in a way to just say, I'm not gonna do that for you. I'm not gonna make this comfortable for you. Either deal with it or not.
Yeah, well, and I think that I love what you said about being able to kind of hold both stories at the same time, and so much of your own journey, and I think something that would be so helpful to lots of our viewers would be to hear a little bit about how mindfulness and developing self-compassion and learning to kind of be with the hard feelings or the sometimes conflicting stories, that can be so important, because we sort of have these competing narratives of the fabulous single woman who's just every night out in the town with the fabulous cocktails and the fabulous dates, and having so much fun, which can be really hard to, and that might be true. There's a lot of fun and fabulousness sometimes, and freedom in being single, and then at the same time there's the Saturday night where you are sitting at home and feeling like a longing for a partner, which is a natural, normal human longing. And then you're judging that longing with, that means I'm needy, or that means I'm too dependent, or that means I'm, codependent, or what. I mean, we have a lot of labels for these things.
Well, we have this idea that anytime we feel pain, that is an indication that there is something wrong with us, as opposed to just that is part of being a human being. Like loneliness, frustration, boredom, longing, these things are all just human experiences that everyone has. And so that was a very helpful concept when I had a yoga and a meditation teacher who really drove that home. I'm also a big fan of Pema Chodron's writing. She talks about this a lot. So that was something that was very helpful for me, was when I was, by myself on a Saturday night and feeling that longing, to just actually feel it, but feel it physically, and not the story about being lonely, but just like, what does that actually feel like in my body? Like, what is that, like, clench in my chest, or that feeling in my heart, or whatever that feeling is. And what's interesting about that is that when you do that, when you sit quietly for 10 minutes or so, just allowing that experience to happen, what you realize is you don't die. That it's actually not that bad. I think that we do so much to shut away those feelings, and if you actually just have them, you just realize that it's just a sensation. It's not personal. It's just you're just having this human sensation that everyone who's ever walked this earth has had, and it's not that big a deal. And it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't fix the problem. Like, it doesn't mean that everything's going to magically, you're going to get that phone call that you want to get, or a text message that you want to get. But it gives. I found that the more I did that, there's like a certain kind of strength that develops from doing that, because like I said, you realize you can deal with it, and you also don't compound your pain, because before it was, I feel lonely, but then there was judgment to the lonely, like, I'm lonely, therefore I'm a loser, therefore, it becomes, so you like sort of add layers to the pain. And if you actually just feel the original pain, again, it's actually not that bad. Or maybe it is that bad, but you get through it.
Right. And then it's like you get to find out, okay, what happens after the meltdown, right? What happens after I say yes to it and just let it in and spend some time with it. And often you find that it has a lot less power when it's when you're not spending all of your energy kind of trying to push it away or judge it away or re-script yourself so intensely. right? Because
Yeah.
there can be value in that, in sort of some of that re-scripting and choosing where to focus your attention and choosing where to focus your energy. But when you give yourself that space to feel those feelings and don't attach it to it a meaning about what it says about you as a human, that you're feeling this way, it can allow you to move through it more easily.
Yeah, it passes through you more. It becomes just like any other sensation. You have it for a while, and then it's over. And it's a lot less likely to kind of come back and just cling in that way.
So let's talk about control for a minute, because what's interesting is that as hard as it might be to hear a long list of, you're too needy, you're not needy, you're too independent, you're too picky, you should have married that guy that you met back when you were 18, whatever the story is, as hard as it can be to be with those, at least part of the appeal is that if we know that there's something specific wrong, maybe we're in control, maybe we can fix it. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is how all of these, we have all these illusions of control. Even once people are married, they often have this false sense of permanence, right? That, okay, now I know what's happening in my life. Now everything's under control. So I'm really curious, how do you, when you let go of that control and that idea that if I just find that one thing I need to fix, then I'll find love.
So
how do you work with that?
People have asked me this before. And that was actually in my initial conversation with my publisher. That was a question that came up. Is just like, well, if there's nothing you can do, what then? And it's kind of a scary idea. But what I think that I realize is that all of the things that I did, or not all of them, but even the stuff that I did that was weird and stupid, in order to try and make myself ready for love, or to try and fix myself, so much of that stuff actually did make me feel a lot happier. It's like, as I said, the yoga and the meditation was a big part of just my feeling a lot better. And I did a lot of just fun stuff. I took acting lessons, and I got a dog, and I did a lot of things that, like, in the back of my head.
Right, commitment, right? Getting the dog.
Yeah, commitment. I could commit to a dog. So there were all kinds of things that in the back of my head was sort of, well, I'm doing this to sort of make myself this more evolved person who will be able to be in a relationship. And it used to really bug me that it wasn't working. But the thing is that even though I don't think any of that stuff had anything to do with meeting my husband, which was just this kind of arbitrary occurrence. And I like to think at least that he would have liked my, more neurotic 32-year-old self than, the person who was calmer and happier at 39. I like to believe that he would have still liked me. But so it didn't really have anything to do with actually meeting him, but it did. In terms of making me, it did, all that stuff I did make me a lot happier and calmer and make my life better. So I think that maybe instead of focusing it on, like, everything has to be about fixing myself so that I can get the relationship, just to think about it in terms of just, like, how can I make my life better? How can I enjoy my life more? And instead of, like, self-improvement, think about it in terms of self-care, just taking care of yourself. Because all of these messages aren't going to go away. I mean, there's always going to be people, either people who are well-intentioned and who only want the best for you, or these kind of more insidious cultural forces telling women, yeah, you better hurry up. You're becoming less attractive by the minute, and all of that stuff. Like, that stuff's not going to go away. But if you can kind of find that your own sense of self-possession, then you just can't lose, because even if it doesn't work, you're still just going to be a much happier person.
And yeah, so part of it is, like, giving yourself the space to really reconsider, what does working mean, right? Like, we often do all these things attaching the only way that we'll know this is working is if it manifests a partner for us. But there's so many versions of what working could be. Working could be having, a whole life that really feels whole to you, or that feels like, you're you're living the life that you want to live. You're going to yoga because you want to go to yoga, right?
Yeah, exactly. Not because you want your arms to look better for your date on. Yeah, exactly. Because it makes your life better. And so, I'm very clear in my book that I don't know how to find a partner. I don't know how that happens. There's just, there's never any guarantee in anything about life. There's no guarantee that I'm going to be alive tomorrow. There's just no guarantee about anything. So I certainly am not trying to say that if that the yoga and meditation will be the way, but I found that just taking care of myself, it just made me happier no matter what happened.
And I think it's so important, because there are all those messages that we get bombarded with, to also realize it's really normal to have a normal human reaction to those messages.
Yeah.
If you're being attacked with constantly, and people don't mean, oftentimes, most
Right.
times people aren't meaning to attack you. They're often, like you make a real point of talking about in the book, there are so many of these messages that come from a good place, a place of trying to support or bolster or whatever. But you'd hardly be human if you didn't sometimes have a reaction or take a little bit of a hit from hearing some of these things.
Yeah, and that's true. It's just like, and I think that's why it gets back to that feeling of like when something painful happens, to just be able to say, okay, that didn't feel good. Having a feeling right now that is not good, but to not have to, like, it can just be that, and as opposed to, why does this keep happening? How could she do that? Why doesn't she get it? It's just a matter of just maybe clearing out some of that emotional extra baggage and clutter, so that and honoring the fact that, yeah, we do have all these crazy emotions all day long, or they're not crazy emotions, they're actually very sane emotions. But we pass through different emotional experiences all the time. And whether you're single or married or divorced or widowed, we're not any one way. People like to say, I'm a happy person, or she's so depressed, or whatever, or and the reality is, like, we're just always changing. Our emotions are changing. The cells of our bodies are changing. That's a little bit, but it's so. What I relaxing is just realizing that that every emotional experience I have is just a part of life. It's part of being a human being, and it's nothing to be to freak out about, or nothing to because being upset that you're upset, like I said before, it only compounds the upset. And instead, I take a lot of inspiration from what Pema Chodron has said about this, which is just like, it's a more joyful way to live, to simply be curious about all the different emotions we have, whether it's bitter or sweet. And the bitter sweet analogy, I think, really kind of works, because we wouldn't want to only taste sugary food. We also like salty and bitter, and we want a whole plate. So I think in our emotional life, we only want to sort of feel the sweet things, but there's that I think that limits our experience a lot.
And yeah, we can have appreciation for the awkward date, or for the that experience of, like, oh yeah, look at me being a human. This is part of it.
Because that's really our wealth. I mean, those are the stories we end up telling our friends. Those are the things that sometimes, we always say, like, you'll laugh about it later, but that's the things that really connects us. And one of the things that's really been interesting about writing this book, I mean, when I was writing it, I had no idea if people were going to say, wow, it's been wonderful to find out how many people connect with the book. But when I was writing it, I remember saying to a friend, it's just like, it was a little scary, because I just thought, wow. I didn't know if people were just going to think I was crazy, because I was just kind of putting out my most vulnerable moments in life. And I had, because of the other pieces, I had a decent sense that it would probably go okay, but it was a whole book and a lot of it was just me sharing some really vulnerable stuff. And you never know when you're doing that, whether or not that's something that people are going to really connect with, or whether they're going to be like, wow, okay. And what's been really interesting about getting the feedback on the book is to realize just how much we all have in common. So, and how universal so many things that we think are so particular to us and our own like weird neuroses. It turns out a lot of other people feel that way too, and maybe not everybody, but enough people so that when you have these difficult experiences, you can realize you're getting information that could be useful to somebody else someday when they're going through that. And you can say, oh, I went through that, and here's what I did. So
okay. I like to think of it sometimes as like, ooh, field work, right? Like you go through a horrible breakup and you're like, okay, this is field work. This is going to be useful to somebody someday for me to be going through this.
yeah, and probably and you as well. Like the more you can be kind of conscious about it, and say, this is interesting. What's going on? Not to say that you won't feel it. You'll feel it, and you're not going to be able to just initially just be like, oh yes, just to switch into lab researcher mode. But I do think it's very helpful.
So, in terms of the actual process of dating, you call dating an act of outrageous vulnerability, which I love. I like it partly because it just kind of feels a little badass, you can be like, I'm outrageously vulnerable. That's right. What, in addition to sort of the mindfulness and the sort of being with all of the feelings at once, what advice do you have? I know it's not an advice book per se, but for kind of weathering the kind of single storms that can come up during the dating game and while you're dating, and how do you stay calm through that process of dating?
Sure, that's a good question. I think the thing that was helpful for me was just realizing that, especially as women, we're getting this mess that we're at this big disadvantage, and men have all these choices. But the bottom line is, especially if you're going on an internet date with some guy, you're going on a date with another person who was looking for love online, and there's something kind of nicely humbling about that. I found that and so to just whether you connect with this person, whether you like this person, you can have compassion for the fact that you guys are in the same boat. You're both looking for love, and whether it's going to happen between the two of you or not is you don't know, or maybe you do know right away. But regardless of that, this person is also out there trying to find someone, and if they're obnoxious and if they're arrogant, like if you're on a bad date, that's their pain too. That's sort of their some kind of defense that's going up. So it doesn't have to be always about like that feeling. And this is a little bit maybe me preaching something I wasn't always so good at practicing, but
so much easier.
To see that this is a person who is lonely and probably and might be hurting too. So it doesn't have to be this personal attack on you. It doesn't have to be about, I had to go on this terrible date, and why does this keep happening to me? I had all those thoughts, but that was something that helped me, was just to think about this other person as just being another soul in the world trying to find love.
Yeah, I love that. Right, that's their pain too. It's not all sort of on your shoulders to. If I had done everything right, or if only I was doing it right, then this would have turned out differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you talk about there's nothing wrong with me, and now you partly wrote the book not only to tell other people. You feel like in some ways you might have been allowed almost to write this book now because you're married, and in a way that you might have been judged if you wrote it when you were single very differently. But you said that you wrote it partly for almost like you wanted to be able to say it to yourself, to an earlier version of yourself. Yet we all have to go, to some extent, it's like, we all have to go through some of our own journey, and no matter what perspective we get from somebody else, a lot of it, we kind of have to go through that journey to figure it out. So I'm just kind of wondering how, for people who maybe don't have yeah, they're right in the muck of it still, right? They're still covered in the mud.
Yeah. Yeah.
How, to use a great metaphor that you talk about in the book, how can people who don't have the benefit of that perspective, how could 32-year-old you have benefited most from a book like It's Not You, or from, kind of making some of these concepts that sound good, making them actionable in their lives?
That's a good question. Well, I think that, as you said, I was writing this kind of partly for my 32-year-old self. And maybe what would have been helpful for me at 32 would to think about what 39-year-old me, or or 44-year-old me, or whatever would have said to sort of think forward into the future as well. To think, well, what if 5 years from now I'm happily married? Like, what do I think I would say to myself then? So that's something that might be a useful exercise to think about.
Love
what
that.
you would say. And one woman wrote to me a little ways before the book was coming out, and she said, I know that if in 5 years I've found someone, I'll feel like all this worrying about it was a waste of time. And I said, well, won't it be a waste of time anyway? Because the worrying part is really not the useful part. I think that the more just this, just to think about taking care of yourself, and think about what you can do to just make your life more enjoyable, more fun, more fulfilling, regardless of whether you find a partner, because then you can't really lose. And I do believe in getting out there. I mean, it's the worst thing to say to somebody. It's horrible, but I mean, I think, and
it makes me think of that Sex and the City episode. I don't know if you're familiar, where Charlotte's there and the woman is on the stage. She's some dating guru or whatever, and she says, "You're not really out there," right? And it's like, she's out there.
Yeah, and it's like, where is this there? Like, where is this place called there that one must get to? But so I that always drove me nuts. But I do think that, again, it's like what you were talking about earlier about like that. It's in yoga they talk about the balance between effort and surrender, which I think that you get this advice that you have to relax and let it come naturally, but then it doesn't come naturally, so you got to get out there, and then you kind of exhaust yourself. And I think it's really just about being, and again, it gets to tapping into your instincts, about just really finding a way to make it a healthy experience. It's just from a sheer perspective of numbers, just finding ways to meet new people. I do think that is just from a practical point of view, a good idea. So if, like, for example, I really enjoyed, some of the things that I really loved doing was, I did love going to yoga, and I took acting lessons, and I took some fiction writing classes, and not a whole lot of guys at those things, so I just had very girly interests, and still do. So, and I'm proud of my girly interests, but in terms from a practical perspective, it was sort of like, okay, here I am in another room full of women. So there is, I do think that, to think about things practically, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just about finding that balance. And as you say, like being able to hold two ideas in your head. I mean, you have a job, but sometimes you want another job. So you look for a job, but it doesn't mean you don't do the job that you have. You just take some time and look for another job, or, it's like anything else. And you make effort, but if it doesn't come to fruition right away, it's the beating yourself up for it not working out that's the part that I think is should be cut out. The part to cut out. Just make the effort, and then be like, all right, I give it a shot, and that's all.
And when you take away the judgment, you talk about how so many of the "you're too, you're not enough," all of the things in the book, there may be some value in pieces of some of them, but it's the judgment and the stuff about you're not enough that's useless, right? There might be value in being out there, but blaming yourself that you haven't found love because you're not out there enough is where it becomes self-defeating and really everyone defeating, right? There's no value in having that kind of that kind of pressure on yourself.
Yeah, because then I think you do. That's another way that the Saturday night on your own gets really harsh, because you think, oh my God, there's 52 Saturdays in a year, and I just I'm not out there, like, because you can get really like, that's when I remember feeling that then in particular, that sense of just like, oh, I'm just wasting time, and it just, I think that you talked about control earlier. I think so much about it is there's a kind of control that comes from relaxing into the fact that you can't control everything. Mm-hmm. So if you can sort of realize, like, well, nothing came up this weekend, so I think I'm just gonna relax and just sort of, and then you can be a little bit more then you're kind of refreshed for when something comes up on Tuesday or whatever. You didn't spend all weekend stressing or trying to gin up something. And then when the other thing comes up, you're like, oh yeah, I'll do that. You know what I mean? And I find that just not just about dating, but as a freelance writer, sometimes I have a lot of work, sometimes I don't have any work, and it's just trying to find that balance where I just get up every day and do what has to be done, and don't freak out too much when I don't have work, and don't freak out too much when I have a lot of work. Just sort of realize that if I have a break, maybe I should just take the break. Mm. Let those breaks enjoy the breaks when they happen.
And the micro moments don't define the big picture, right? The fact that you're curled up on your couch sobbing and watching Bridget Jones' Diary for the 97th time right in this moment doesn't have to define your life as a whole.
Right, because next week it'll probably be different. Or, and even if it's, or next month or something, we all have those nights, and then we all have the nights that we're out with our friends having a great time, and a million other different kinds of nights.
So what would you say to the 30-something single who is watching right now and maybe loving a lot of things in their lives, but sort of waking up with or going to bed with that question, that gnawing question, what if I never meet her, or what if I never meet him? What if it never happens?
Yeah, that's, maybe think about, I think that when we ask ourselves that what if question, we don't like follow through on it. Well, what if it never happens? What would that be like? One thing that I realized is like, well, I guess my life would be the way it is now, which it turns out is not this horror show. Is actually, there's a lot to like about it. So yes, I would like this thing to happen, but if my life simply continued as it is, I realized, like, well, that's not that bad. Mm-hmm. So I remember one time seeing someone, and she asked me if I was seeing anybody, and I said, no, I haven't for ages. And she said, oh, you'll find someone. And I just said, or not, it's like, so like sometimes I think just like maybe even just thinking about what that means. And one thing I remember when I sort of followed through on that thought was, well, one thing I have to do is kind of get my finances in order. And that was sort of when I bought an apartment, and I started to get my IRA done, and just all those things that a lot of times you associate with marriage and being a grown up. I just realized, like, if I'm going to be on my own for the rest of my life, I don't want to be on my own and poor. Like, I want to have, I want to have resources. So it was just kind of empowering to do that, and to just realize that, okay, what are the parts of this that I can control?
And we're so not used to hearing that, that you might not, right? Like, or not. Yeah. We're so used to hearing, well, you will meet someone, you will. So it can create a sort of emotional vacuum, I think, sometimes, just to say, okay, I might not. I can't know that. I can't control that. I can get out there and take steps to hope to put myself in the company of lots of people one of whom I might fall in love with.
Yeah.
But it's very counter to the way we usually tell this story.
Yeah, it is. And it's I just think that again it's sort of like sitting with the pain. You real like it's the fear of going there is, if you just go there, it's actually not as bad as you think. So it kind of, and then you can kind of develop, I think that can be really, it end up being kind of a source of strength.
So I'm really hoping that all of our viewers and listeners will read your book. It is just incredible, but I'm wondering what one thought, or whether it's a piece of advice, or what thought would you leave our readers with, and our listeners and viewers with?
I think that maybe instead of, if you're really spending a lot of time wondering what's wrong with you, maybe spend some time thinking about what's right with you. And not, and you know, a lot of advice is just like, and you know, get letters from women saying like, you know, I have a great job and a great apartment and great friends, great career. Like, not even like that stuff. I mean, that's all good, but just like, perhaps the reason you are not in a relationship is simply because you've had the good judgment to avoid the wrong thing. Rather than you were afraid or you picked bad boys or whatever it is. Like, just, you know, and again, I don't, just to kind of explore that maybe that's the reason, is that you know yourself and you know what you need, and you just haven't found that yet.
So what's right with you, not just what's wrong with you.
Yeah, and I think that knowing what's right with you, and having that clear sense, I do believe that will make it easier to find that person, when if you just kind of, again, if you can just develop that trust in yourself and in your judgment, as opposed to getting your head cluttered up with a lot of other people's ideas about what you should want or what you should be looking for. I think that's helpful.
And sometimes even just sort of hearing what those ideas are in a more concrete way can help you to release some of them, which is a great reason to pick up this book, right? Because you can sort of, it's really boiled down to, these are the messages that we might be getting, and once you know what they are, you can say, okay, thank you for sharing, thank you for telling me that you think I'm too available. Next, right? I'm gonna go to yoga now.
So many, like the woman who was too available, she was, you know, then she met the right guy, and then she was, and he didn't mind that she was available. He was glad. He wanted to marry her. So,
right. She was available.
So yeah, so there's a lot of women that made the same mistakes that we are accused of making, and do just fine.
So the book is It's Not You, 27 Wrong Reasons You're Single. It is absolutely amazing. I would love for it to be in the hands of every member of our 30-something tribe. And Sara Eckel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
You can find out more about Sara at www.saraeckel.com, and you can also download a free bonus chapter to It's Not You there as well. And you can find out more about me and the 30-something coach at www.carriespaulding.com.